After a checkup, my son said, "We've decided you're going to live with other elderly ladies. It's more practical." I picked up my phone and froze the loan that was under my name. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. The fluorescent lights in Dr. Martinez's office buzzed overhead as I folded the prescription papers into my purse. Another clean bill of health at 68. My blood pressure was perfect, my heart strong, my mind sharp as ever. I should have felt relieved, grateful even. Instead, I felt a knot forming in my stomach as I walked toward the parking lot, where my son John waited in his silver SUV. "How did it go, Mom?" he asked, but his tone was distracted, almost impatient. His fingers drummed against the steering wheel. "Everything's fine," I said, settling into the passenger seat. "Dr. Martinez said I'm healthier than most people half my age." John nodded absently, pulling out of the parking lot. We drove in silence for a few minutes before he cleared his throat. "Actually, Mom, Michelle and I have been talking, and we've made a decision." Something in his voice made my chest tighten. This wasn't the tone he used for casual conversation. This was the voice he used at work, when he was delivering news that couldn't be negotiated. "We think it's time you moved somewhere more practical," he continued, not looking at me. "Somewhere with people your own age, where you can have activities, social interaction. You know, a community." The words hit me like a physical blow. I turned to stare at his profile, searching for some sign that this was a joke, a misunderstanding. But his jaw was set, his eyes focused straight ahead on the road. "A community?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "A senior living facility," he said, as if the euphemism would soften the impact. "Michelle found this great place about 20 minutes from our house. Sunset Gardens. They have bingo nights, craft classes, even a little library." My hands began to shake in my lap. "You want to put me in a home?" "It's not putting you anywhere, Mom. It's about what's best for everyone. You're getting older and that house is too big for you. What if something happens? What if you fall and no one's there?" I had lived in that house for 35 years. I had raised John there after his father died, worked 2 jobs to pay the mortgage, scraped together every penny for his college tuition. That house held every memory of our life together, every milestone, every moment that mattered. "I'm perfectly capable of living in my own home," I managed to say. John sighed, the sound heavy with practiced patience. "We've already visited the place, Mom. It's really nice. Michelle spoke with the director, and they have an opening next month. The timing is perfect." They had already visited. They had made plans, decisions, arrangements, all without me. I sat there in the passenger seat of my son's car, feeling smaller and more invisible than I had ever felt in my life. "Next month." The words came out strangled. I know it seems fast, but these places fill up quickly. And honestly, Mom, Michelle and I think it's the most practical solution. You'll have people to talk to, activities to keep you busy, and we won't have to worry about you being alone in that big house. Practical. That word cut deeper than anything else he could have said. I wasn't his mother anymore. I was a problem to be solved, a burden to be managed efficiently. We pulled into my driveway and John finally looked at me. For just a moment I saw a flicker of something. Guilt, maybe, or uncertainty. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Think about it, okay?" he said. "Michelle's already got the paperwork started." I got out of the car without saying goodbye, my legs unsteady beneath me. As I watched him drive away, I realized that my son, the boy I had sacrificed everything for, had just sentenced me to exile from my own life. Standing in my driveway, looking up at the house that held 40 years of memories, I felt something crack open inside my chest. Not just my heart, but something deeper. Something that had been holding me together for decades. They thought this was practical. They had no idea what practical really looked like. I sat in my kitchen for hours after John left, staring at the same cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The house felt different now, not like home but like a place I was already being evicted from. Every corner held memories that apparently meant nothing to my son. The scuff mark on the doorframe where he'd learned to ride his bike indoors during a rainstorm. The height marks penciled on the wall documenting his growth from age 5 to 18. None of it mattered to him anymore. My hand shook as I reached for my phone to call my sister Margaret, but I stopped myself. What would I say? That my son wanted to warehouse me with strangers because I'd become inconvenient? The shame was almost unbearable. Instead, I walked to my bedroom and pulled out the filing cabinet I kept in my closet. My fingers moved automatically to the folder marked Loans and Mortgages. Inside, beneath insurance papers and old tax documents, I found what I was looking for. The loan agreement signed 3 years ago. $180,000. My signature on every page, authorizing the bank to use my house as collateral so John could buy his dream home in the suburbs. I had been so proud when he asked for my help, so happy that I could finally give him something substantial after years of scraping by. "Mom, this would mean everything to Michelle and me," he'd said then, his eyes bright with excitement. "We found the perfect house, but we need help with the down payment and closing costs. If you could just co-sign, maybe use your house as security. I'll handle all the payments, I promise. You won't have to worry about anything." I had driven to the bank that very afternoon, signed every document they put in front of me, and watched my son's face light up when I told him it was approved. He had hugged me tight and promised he'd never forget what I'd done for him. The irony wasn't lost on me. The loan that had made his comfortable suburban life possible was still in my name. John was listed as the primary borrower responsible for payments, but I was the guarantor. If he defaulted, I would lose my house. But the loan itself, that was mine to control. I pulled out my laptop and logged into my online banking. The loan account stared back at me, showing a remaining balance of $164,000. John had been making payments faithfully for 3 years, never missing a due date. He was a responsible borrower, just like he'd promised to be. But responsible borrowers could still have their loans called in early if the guarantor requested it. I had read the fine print carefully when I signed, even though John had brushed off my concerns. "You're just backup, Mom. This is really my loan." Except it wasn't. Not legally. The bank had made that very clear. My finger hovered over the customer service number. One phone call could change everything. One conversation could turn their practical solution into their worst nightmare. I thought about the senior living facility brochure John had probably already picked up. I imagined him and Michelle sitting in their beautiful home. The home I had helped them buy, discussing how much easier their lives would be once they disposed of me. No more obligation to check on Mom. No more guilt about not visiting enough. No more inconvenient reminders of where John had come from. The phone felt heavy in my hand as I dialed. "First National Bank, this is Patricia speaking. How can I help you today?" "I need to speak with someone about calling in a loan early," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Certainly, ma'am. Can you provide me with your account number?" I read off the numbers, my heart pounding as I heard Patricia typing. "I see here that you're the guarantor on this mortgage loan. Are you requesting full payment of the remaining balance?" "Yes," I said. "I want the loan paid in full within 30 days. I need to transfer you to our loan specialist, but I can tell you that as the guarantor, you do have the right to make this request. Please hold for just a moment." As I waited on hold, I walked to my living room window and looked out at the garden I had tended for decades. The roses I had planted when John graduated high school were blooming again, their deep red petals catching the afternoon sunlight. If they wanted practical, I would give them practical. If they wanted to treat me like a business transaction, then that's exactly how I would handle this. The loan specialist came on the line, confirming what I already knew. As guarantor, I could demand immediate payment. The 30-day notice would go out tomorrow. John had no idea what was coming. 2 weeks passed in an eerie calm. I went about my daily routine, tending my garden, reading on the porch, organizing photo albums that John would probably throw away once I was gone. Every time my phone rang, I expected it to be him, but he seemed content to let his practical solution simmer while I supposedly considered my fate. On Thursday morning, I was watering my roses when I heard the screech of tires in my driveway. Through the front window, I watched John leap out of his car, his face flushed red, a crumpled envelope clutched in his hand. Michelle remained in the passenger seat, her arms crossed, staring straight ahead with barely contained fury. The front door burst open without a knock. "Mom, what the hell is this?" I set down my watering can and turned to face him calmly. He stood in my doorway waving the bank notice like an accusation, his usually neat hair disheveled, tie askew. "I assume it's a letter from the bank," I said, settling into my favorite armchair. It says you're calling in the loan. The entire balance. Due in full in 30 days. His voice cracked on the last words. That's correct. John stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. You can't do this. Actually, I can. I'm the guarantor. I have every legal right to request immediate payment. Michelle finally stalked into the house, her designer heels clicking angrily against my hardwood floors. This is insane, Carol. We can't possibly pay that amount right now. Then you should have thought of that before you decided to send me to a home, I replied evenly. John ran his hands through his hair, pacing back and forth across my living room like a caged animal. This is about the senior living facility? Mom, we were trying to help you. Help me. I stood up, feeling anger surge through my chest for the first time in weeks. You made a decision about my life without consulting me. You visited facilities, spoke to directors, started paperwork. All behind my back. You treated me like a problem to be solved. We thought you'd be happier with people your own age, Michelle interjected, but her voice lacked conviction now. You thought it would be more convenient for you, I corrected. More practical, wasn't that the word you used, John? My son stopped pacing and looked at me with desperate eyes. Okay, maybe we handled it wrong. Maybe we should have talked it through with you first. But Mom, this is our house we're talking about. Our mortgage. You can't just destroy our lives because you're upset. Destroy your lives? I let out a bitter laugh. The same way you were planning to destroy mine? Michelle stepped forward, her face twisted with anger. You're being vindictive and cruel. We have children to think about. Your own grandchildren. Grandchildren who barely know me exist because you've spent 5 years making sure they only visit on holidays. I shot back. When's the last time Emma or little Michael spent more than an hour in this house? John's face went pale. We all knew the answer to that question. Look, he said, his voice taking on the pleading tone he'd used as a child when he was in trouble. We can work this out. We can find a different solution about the living situation. But you have to give us more time with the loan. We don't have that kind of money just sitting around. Where did you think you'd get the money to pay for my care at Sunset Gardens? I asked. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. They had planned to sell my house. My home of 35 years, the only security I had left in the world, was going to be liquidated to pay for my own imprisonment. You were going to put my house on the market, I said softly. Michelle and John exchanged a guilty glance. Not immediately, John said weakly. But eventually, yes. It's too much house for one person, and the equity could help cover. Get out, I said quietly. Mom, please, let's just talk about this rationally. Get out of my house, I repeated louder this time. Both of you. Michelle grabbed John's arm. Come on. She's being impossible. Let's go call a lawyer. As they headed toward the door, John turned back one last time. You have 30 days too, Mom. If we can't pay, the bank will come after your house as collateral. I met his gaze steadily. Then I guess we're both taking a big gamble, aren't we? After they left, I sat back down in my chair and picked up the phone. I had some calls to make and 30 days wasn't very much time. But I'd had 2 weeks to prepare for this moment. John had taught me well over the years. Sometimes being practical meant being ruthless. The next morning, I was already dressed and sipping my coffee when my phone rang at 7:30. John's number flashed on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. By the 4th call, I finally answered. Mom, thank God. We need to talk. Michelle and I stayed up all night trying to figure this out. And we can get a loan against my 401k, maybe take out a second mortgage, but we need time. More than 30 days. Can you call the bank and extend the deadline? I set down my coffee cup carefully. I'm afraid not. What do you mean you're afraid not? I mean I've made other arrangements. The silence stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. Finally. What kind of arrangements? I've moved my accounts, John. Yesterday afternoon. Everything is now with a different bank entirely. You can't do that. The loan is still valid. Of course it is. But when the 30 days are up and you can't pay, First National will contact my new bank to collect on the collateral. At which point my new bank will inform them that I've restructured my assets in a way that makes my house no longer available as security. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. How is that even possible? It's called estate planning, dear. Something you might want to look into. What I didn't tell him was that I'd spent the previous afternoon with Harold Brennan, the lawyer who'd handled my husband's estate 20 years ago. Harold had listened to my situation with the grave expression of a man who'd seen too many families tear themselves apart over money. Carol, he'd said, what you're proposing is completely legal, but it's going to burn every bridge you have with your son. He burned those bridges when he decided to ship me off to storage, I'd replied. Harold had helped me establish a trust, transferring ownership of my house and most of my assets into an entity that couldn't be touched by the loan default. It wasn't fraud. It was simply protecting myself from financial ruin when John inevitably failed to pay. You're destroying our family, John said now, his voice breaking. No, son. You did that when you stopped seeing me as your mother and started seeing me as a burden. Over the next 2 weeks, John called daily. Sometimes pleading, sometimes angry, sometimes trying to negotiate. Michelle sent long text messages explaining their financial situation, begging me to reconsider. They offered to increase their visits, to have the grandchildren stay overnight more often, to take me on vacation with them. But I'd heard all these promises before, whenever they needed something from me. And I'd watched them fade away as soon as the crisis passed. The most telling call came from Michelle herself, 3 days before the loan deadline. Carol, you have to understand our position, she said, her voice artificially sweet. We've looked into getting a personal loan, but with John's credit score and our current debt load, no bank will approve us for that amount. We're trapped. You should have considered that before taking on debt you couldn't handle, I replied. We could handle it. The monthly payments were fine. We never missed one. You're the one who changed the terms in the middle of the game. The way you changed the terms of my living situation? Michelle's composure finally cracked. You know what? Fine. You want to play hardball? Two can play that game. When we lose the house, we'll make sure everyone knows exactly why. Your church friends, the neighbors Emma and Michael. They'll all know that their grandmother chose revenge over family. After she hung up, I sat in my garden among the roses and thought about reputation, about what people would think. For most of my life, I'd cared deeply about appearing to be a good mother, a good person. I'd swallowed hurt feelings and overlooked slights because that's what good mothers did. But good mothers, I'd learned, often raised selfish children. The final call came on day 29. John's voice was hollow, defeated. We're going to lose everything, Mom. The house, our credit, probably our marriage. Michelle's already talking to lawyers. Is this really what you wanted? I looked around my living room, at the family photos that would soon be the only reminder of what we'd once been to each other. What I wanted, I said quietly, was to spend my remaining years in my own home with my family's love and respect. Since that wasn't practical, I chose to keep at least the home. Tomorrow, the bank would foreclose on John's house. Tomorrow, he would learn what it felt like to be displaced, to have your security ripped away by people who claim to love you. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I just felt tired. 3 months after the foreclosure, I was pruning my roses when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Through the trellis, I saw John walking toward my front door. But something was different about him. His shoulders were hunched, his expensive suit replaced by jeans and a wrinkled shirt. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in 3 months. I opened the door before he could knock. Hello, John. He stood there for a moment just looking at me. Can I come in? I stepped aside, and he walked into the living room where this had all started. He didn't sit down, just stood in the middle of the room with his hands in his pockets. Michelle filed for divorce last week, he said without preamble. I felt a pang of something. Not quite sympathy, but not satisfaction either. I'm sorry to hear that. He let out a bitter laugh. Are you? Because she says it's all your fault. Says I'm weak for not being able to control my own mother. And what do you say? John finally looked at me directly. I say she's probably right about the weak part. He moved to the window, staring out at the garden where he used to play as a child. We're living in a rental now. One of those month-to-month places. Michelle took the kids to her mother's house. Says she needs time to think about whether she wants to stay married to someone who can't provide stability. I watched him struggle with words. This son who had always been so articulate, so confident. The thing is, Mom, I keep thinking about something Michelle said right before she left. She said you probably knew this would happen all along. That you planned it. What do you think? He turned away from the window. I think she was right about that too. We stood in silence for a long moment. Finally, John sat down heavily on my couch, the same spot where he used to curl up with me to read bedtime stories. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me, he said. Did you know about the senior living facility before that day in the car? My heart started beating faster. This was the conversation I'd been dreading and anticipating for months. Why would you ask that? Because Michelle mentioned something. She said you seemed too calm that day, too prepared. Like you weren't surprised. I walked to my kitchen and poured 2 glasses of iced tea, buying myself time to think. When I returned, John was holding one of the photo albums I'd been organizing, staring at a picture of the 2 of us from his high school graduation. 2 weeks before your doctor's appointment, I said finally. I was in my backyard watering the plants. Your bedroom window was open, and I could hear Michelle on the phone with someone. She was talking about square footage and monthly fees and how much easier it would be once the old lady was out of the way. John's face went pale. She was already planning it, John. The senior living facility, selling my house to pay for it, everything. You just delivered the message. He set down the photo album with shaking hands. Why didn't you say anything? What would have been the point? You'd already made your choice. You chose her version of practical over any consideration of what I might want. But if you knew, why didn't you try to fight it? Why didn't you try to change my mind? I sat down across from him, this boy I'd raised to be a man, who'd somewhere along the way forgotten how to be my son. Because I realized something that day. You weren't asking for my input because you didn't value my opinion. You were informing me of a decision you'd already made. The son I raised would have said, Mom, Michelle and I are worried about you living alone. Can we talk about some options? But that's not what happened. John put his head in his hands. She said it was the practical thing to do. She said we'd be helping you. And you believed her because it was easier than admitting you wanted me out of the way. That's not true. Isn't it? I leaned forward. When's the last time you visited me just because you wanted to spend time with me? Not because you needed something, not because it was a holiday, but just because you missed your mother. He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. I spent 30 years putting you first, John. I worked 2 jobs to pay for your college, gave up dating because I didn't want to confuse you with a stepfather, used my retirement savings to help with your wedding. And the moment I became inconvenient, you were ready to warehouse me with strangers. Tears were running down his face now. I didn't know she was planning it behind your back. I swear to you, Mom, I thought it was a mutual decision we were making. But you never asked me what I thought. No, he whispered. I didn't. We sat there in the growing darkness, 2 people who had loved each other completely and somehow lost their way. I've lost everything, John said finally. My house, my marriage, probably my kids. Michelle's poisoning them against me, telling them I'm a failure. I looked at this broken man, my son, and felt something shift inside my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but something softer than the anger I'd carried for months. You haven't lost everything, I said quietly, but you've lost the life you thought you were entitled to. 6 months later, I was reading on my front porch when Mrs. Henderson from next door waved me over to the fence that separated our yards. Carol, I don't mean to pry, but I saw John's car in your driveway yesterday. Everything all right? I set down my book and joined her at the fence. Margaret Henderson had been my neighbor for 15 years, and she'd watched the whole drama unfold with the keen interest of someone who'd raised 4 children and survived 2 divorces herself. He's been coming by once a week, I told her. Helping with yard work, fixing little things around the house. And how do you feel about that? It was a fair question. For the first month after our confrontation, I hadn't heard from John at all. Then one Saturday morning he'd appeared at my door with a toolbox, asking if he could repair the loose step on my back porch. No apologies, no dramatic speeches about forgiveness. Just quiet work and careful conversation over coffee afterward. It's different now, I said to Margaret. He doesn't assume anything anymore. He asks before he starts a project. He listens when I talk. It's like he's learning how to be an adult son instead of an entitled child. Margaret nodded knowingly. Sometimes they need to lose everything before they figure out what actually matters. That evening, as if summoned by our conversation, John knocked on my door. He'd been coming by on Wednesdays to help with groceries and Saturday mornings for maintenance work. Today was neither, which meant something was on his mind. "I got the final divorce papers today," he said, settling into the chair across from my kitchen table. "How are you handling it?" He shrugged. "Better than I expected. Michelle and we never really fit together anyway. We just fit each other's ideas of what our lives should look like." Over the past months, I'd learned about the financial pressure Michelle had put on him, the constant comparisons to her friends' husbands, the way she'd used my house as collateral in her own mind long before they'd ever broached the subject of senior living. "What about Emma and Michael?" "I get them every other weekend. Michelle's still angry, but she's not keeping them from me entirely." He paused, tracing patterns on my tablecloth. I told them what really happened. Not all the details, but enough so they'd understand why Grandma and I weren't talking for a while. "And," a small smile crossed his face, "Emma asked if she could come help with your garden this weekend. She's 14 now. Thinks she wants to study agriculture in college." I felt something warm unfold in my chest. "I'd like that." John reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "There's something else. I wanted to give you this." Inside was a check for $37,000. "John, what is this?" "It's not enough to cover what I cost you with the loan situation," he said quickly. "But it's everything I can spare right now from the settlement and my savings. I know I can't undo what happened, but I want to start paying you back." I stared at the check, feeling oddly emotional. It wasn't about the money. I'd restructured my finances and was living comfortably. It was about what the gesture represented. "You don't owe me money," I said finally. "Yes, I do. And not just the money. I owe you respect, consideration, and about 20 years of apologies." I folded the check and handed it back to him. "Keep it. Use it to build a life that makes you happy instead of one that just looks successful." John stared at the return check. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "You're probably right," I said, surprising us both. "But I deserve to stop carrying anger around like a weight in my chest. Forgiveness isn't about what you deserve. It's about what I need." We sat quietly for a while, watching the sun set through my kitchen window. Finally, John spoke. "Michelle called yesterday. She's getting remarried. Some investment banker she met through her lawyer. How do you feel about that?" "Relieved mostly. She'll be someone else's problem now." He caught himself. "That's terrible to say, isn't it?" "It's honest," I replied. "Sometimes terrible and honest are the same thing." As John was leaving that night, he paused at my front door. "Mom, I know things can't go back to the way they were before. But I want you to know, I'm grateful you fought for yourself, even if it meant fighting against me." After he left, I sat in my living room surrounded by the same furniture, the same photos, the same life I'd nearly lost. But everything felt different now. Lighter somehow. My phone rang and I saw Margaret's number on the screen. "Carol, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I wanted to ask you something. My daughter Sarah is going through a divorce, and her ex-husband is trying to force her to sell their house. She could use some advice from someone who knows how to stand up for herself." I smiled, looking around my home, my sanctuary that I'd refused to surrender. "Tell her to come by tomorrow evening," I said. "I'll make dinner and we'll talk." Some battles were worth fighting even when the cost seemed too high. Especially then. I'd learned that the most practical thing a woman could do was refuse to disappear quietly into other people's convenient solutions. At 68, I was finally free to live on my own terms. And those terms included helping other women do the same.